Hello and welcome to everybody on Cloud Fitness. So in today's video, we are going to see what exactly is the training data, what exactly is the testing data set, what do you mean by the validation data set. Now this is one of the very important videos because I will be using these terms continuously, and even when we are doing the hands-on, right, at that time, training and testing pretty much I have explained earlier as well, but especially the validation part. Right now with the hands-on on the ridge, on the lasso or any other algorithm that we are going to do, at that time I'm also going to coin this word validation data set. So that time you should know what exactly is a validation data set. That is why I have created this short video. So let's move ahead, but before moving ahead, I do recommend all of you to connect with me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram, and I will leave the link in the description box. So when we talk about the data set, right, in any in any process, when you're trying to build any algorithm, right, there is three types of data set that we deal with. Okay, mainly it is two, but validation data set is a third type. Right now, the first is your training data set. Now when you talk about the training data set, right, that is the data set on which your algorithm, your machine learning algorithm will actually be trained on, right? So that is your training data set. When you create an algorithm, how you are going to determine the values, right? For example, let's say you are trying to build a linear regression algorithm, right? Y is equals to mx plus c. Now, to determine the values of m and c, you are training your model based on some certain values of x and y. Right now, that value of x and y is nothing but your training data set. You have to train your model on top of it, right? Now, let's say you have 100 records. Now, out of those 100 records, a majority of chunk, around 70 to 80% will go to your training data set. You can, there can be a variation in this 70 to 80%. You can keep 75%, you can keep 80%. Now that particular chunk of data will go to your training data set. When you talk about test data set, right now, once you have trained your model and you want to test your model on how it performs, you want to check how does your model perform. Okay, I have got certain values of m and c based on what I have provided during my training data set, right? I have got the values of m and c in my equation y is equals to mx plus c. Now this is the example that I am taking. Now similarly, when you provide the test data, when you provide again some values of x and you try to determine y, right, you will get some values of y. Now then you check whether your y is, what is the difference between the value of y which has been predicted by the model and the actual y, right? Because your data set will have the actual y also, right? So you are going to compare. Now based on that comparison, you will know what is your model performance, right? So that is your training and then the test data set. So now basically out of 100 records, your 70 to 80 records usually go to the train data set, and your 30 to 20 records go to your test data set. Now test data set is used to determine your model performance. Training data set is used to train your model and define the accuracy of your model. Now when you talk about the validation data set, now this validation data set is something that is taken out from your training data set itself. Now this data set is something that is taken out from your training data set itself. Now out of 70 to 80 records, right, few records you are going to define as validation data set out of that 70 to 80 records. Now in this validation data set, we do something called as hyperparameter tuning. I have also discussed about the hyperparameter, right? I have discussed the theoretical part of ridge and lasso algorithm, right? In that we have cost function plus lambda mode of your slope, or maybe the square of your slope. So that is where the lambda is your hyperparameter. So you tune your hyperparameter as well. So that hyperparameter tuning is actually done using the validation data set. Right now this is something that is called as your cross validation as well. Now you take the data from your training data set, apply some cross validation, and in this case you use your validation data set to apply the cross validation and get your best suitable value for your hyperparameter, the best suitable value for your alpha, which is called as your hyperparameter tuning. Now when I'm explaining all of this, I do recommend watching my previous video, because otherwise half of the things that I'm explaining you will not get it in this particular video. So now when you talk about hyperparameter tuning, or when you talk about this cross validation, or how you are actually going to take this validation data set, now assume that when you talk about the data, let's say you have 100 records, right? So if you see over here, what I'm showing you over here, you can actually see you have a training set, now training set, and then you have a validation set. Now training set total, right? If you see over here, what I've told over here, training data set that you use, right? From this data set you are going to take validation data set. So now let's say your training data set has 80 records. Now let's say your training data set has 80 records, and from that you are going to take the validation set. Now how you are going to take validation set? Based on the cross validations. Based on the cross validations. Now cross validation, you can also say the number of iterations. You will try the certain number of iterations to determine the best suitable value, right? Now that is nothing, that iteration is nothing but that is the cross validation. So let's say you want to perform 5 iterations, or you want to perform 5 cross validations. So now what you will do, whatever your data set is, so let's say you are taking 80 records in your trained data set, so you will say 80 by 5, right? So you will get the value as 16. So this 16 is nothing but this 16 is the number of records, the number of validation data set records that you are going to use for the validation. So now what you will do in the first iteration, right? So 64 records you are going to use in your training data set, and 16 records you are going to use in the validation data set. Now again in the next iteration, right, you are going to use another set of 16 records. In the third iteration you are going to use another set of 16 records as the validation data set. In the iteration 4 you are going to use another set of 16 records, and likewise you are going to make sure that you use all these all the data set. You are making sure that you are using all the data set as the validation data set in each of these iterations. Now there are different methods to do that, so that methods we are going to see in our next video. Now there are different types of cross validation. Now this is one type of cross validation that I am showing you, right, on how the validation data set is chosen. So here if you see, the 16 records are chosen, and it is made sure that each of your 80 rows from your training data set is used as the validation set in each iteration. Now from each iteration you will get some error, right, and this error is nothing but y minus y hat, right? That is what we saw. Now what is it, this y minus y hat, right? That is nothing but a difference between the actual and the predicted value, right? So you are going to get the error, and from here you are going to get the average of the error. So this is what is called as your cross validation, and how you actually take your validation data set. So I hope you understood this video, or basically you understood what it is about, so that when we do the hands-on, that time I don't have to re-explain this, because you should have already watched this video, and it will become very easy for you to understand the further hands-on as well. So I hope you like this video. Do recommend to subscribe to my channel, like this particular video, and do let me know in the comment section if you want me to make any change in the way I am explaining you these concepts. So thank you so much for being till here.